Good morning, colleagues. The first thing I want to say is a warm welcome. Welcome to the Scottish Learning Festival Online 2021, but also a warm welcome to a virtual Scotland to all our international guests and visitors too. I use this picture that's coming up now on the next slide quite intentionally because I thought that we've all joined this morning with a quick click of a button. It does feel like it's a long road it's taken to get us here, to get us to where we are now. So as well as a welcome, let me start with a thank you. A thank you for all that you've done to support our children and young people in Scotland and internationally over the last 18 months. It's been a really long road. Now, let me turn to this morning's presentation. I want to cover the following things. I want to tell you a little bit about SLF Online. I want to spend some time reflecting on the last 18 months, the road, the journey we've all been on. I want to talk about where we are now and how we move forward, and share with you some thoughts from a discussion paper we developed in Education Scotland from our shared evidence bases. So I invite you to our first virtual SLF and invite you to our SLF stand, Education Scotland stand, to carry on the conversation. First, I'm just going to start with a little bit of housekeeping. Unfortunately, like most things last year, SLF 2020 had to be cancelled due to the COVID-19 pandemic. But we're back here with you in 2021 and we're very excited on this return. This is the first time we've delivered SLF in an entirely digital way, and doesn't the platform look great? We're so pleased with it. We've been astounded by the number of people who've signed up to join our sessions over these 3 days. We've got over 5,000 delegates that have signed up in total, with registrations for some sessions at well over 600. The programme over the next 3 days is looking really exciting. We've got 101 sessions planned, which include 4 keynote sessions, 3 critical conversations, 6 sponsor sessions, and a wonderful 88 seminars. The keynotes that are part of SLF Online are being delivered. There's one tonight at 7 o'clock with the Cabinet Secretary for Education and Skills, Shirley-Anne Somerville, her first conversation with the profession. Tomorrow night at 7 o'clock again is the International Council of Education Advisors in a session hosted by Joe Griffin, the Director General for Education and Justice at the Scottish Government. And then on Thursday night, the Right Honourable Stuart Lawrence, who's a formal secondary teacher, a youth engagement specialist, and the younger brother of Stephen Lawrence. All of these I would really commend to you as really key keynote sessions. They'll give you the chance to hear from and engage with a range of presenters from not only the Scottish perspective, but internationally too. In addition to those sessions, we have 3 critical conversations, one running each evening. At these sessions, a panel of experts, hosted by Sarah Philp, will consider and discuss some of the really tough and complex issues around education in Scotland at the current times, so a context for challenge, for engagement and for reflection. Again, you have the opportunity to engage with these panels. I hope you're able to take the opportunity to explore the programme and attend a variety of sessions that interest you. But I do realise that many of you will be committed to class contact during the day, so therefore most of the sessions have been recorded and will be available for you to watch again through the portal until the end of November. And finally, don't forget the virtual exhibition, where we've got 45 exhibitors ready and waiting to chat to you and learn from you and share their work. So now let me move into the main body of what I want to talk to you about this morning by starting with a reflection on the last 18 months. I use this picture of Tobermory quite purposefully, not because I want to promote Scottish staycations or those of you in early years or can remember younger children singing the Tobermory, what do you do in Ballamory? So not because of that, but because if you look at the water, the image, the reflection of the harbour is blurred. And when I reflect on the last 18 months, I feel a little bit like that reflection. The whole period has been so intense for all of us. At times it's really not been clear, much like the harbour here in Tobermory. At times it's felt like the days and weeks have merged together. Like the ripples in the water, at times it's felt like I've been going round in circles and not always in the right direction. So it's important to reflect on what we've all been doing and what we've all been working on globally for the last 18 months. At the start of the pandemic, it was all about maintaining continuity of learning, ensuring the health and well-being of learning communities while all our buildings were closed. Then we entered a period of adjusting to new structures as all children and young people physically returned to their normal physical settings and schools safely, thank goodness. But in many ways, we're still in that kind of one foot in that part of the journey. We're still anxious, we're still dealing with mitigations, and we're still reflecting on where we need to go next. But now we need to use the innovation and learning from the pandemic as a position to build from, to make Scottish education and education systems globally stronger, more innovative and more equitable than they were before. Here's a very simple way of thinking about the journey that we've all been on. As I've already mentioned, at the height of the pandemic, it felt at times like we were going round in circles. We were constantly trying new things, we were constantly finding new ways of working, we were learning what worked and didn't work, and importantly, new ways to work together. But the interesting thing is, every time we went around in a circle, we found a solution and we moved on as we were innovating locally, innovating in establishments and schools, and innovating nationally and ultimately globally. Yes, it was exhausting, probably unsustainable, but for many of us, it was highly motivating. Some would even say liberating. So we've got to learn from that. In this unique moment in time that's ahead of us now, we must make sure that we don't go back to doing what we were doing before just because it was comfortable. Comfortable is not a good place to be if we want to improve, if we want to challenge ourselves and we want to get the best for our young people. We must combine what was working well before COVID and what has worked well during COVID to build new models and ways of working to create a stronger, more innovative and more equitable system that we all aspire to. In Scotland, we can do that collectively. When we think about innovation during lockdown, we often default to talking about innovation purely in digital learning, digital devices, digital access, digital learning and teaching. And while we made great strides in that, and we should all be proud of it, for me, there's something a bit deeper than this. For me, the real innovation has been in four things: collaboration, community building, partnership working, and pace of change. All of those are not necessarily something we would have recognised as strengths of our system before the pandemic. So we need to keep building on all of these things as we move forward. Many examples of innovation in these areas were captured in the work that we did in What Scotland Learned, a recent publication, with also an associated series of webinars that many of you will have attended. Building from this number of practitioners and schools who featured in the publication, there were many of you who sent in your stories, who sent in your voice, and many of them are presenting today at SLF as well. And on the slide, you can see some of the ones that might interest you if you have time or if you want to go back and watch the pre-recorded sessions. Remember, you can catch up on these after the session because most of the sessions will be recorded. Learning together is really important. One of the great things about What Scotland Learned and all of the sessions that I've just mentioned is that it helps us challenge the unhelpful notion of a lost generation that's so often seen in the press and political debate and narrative. The lost generation was a term that was used a lot during World War II. And just like then, it was proved in the years emerging from World War II that actually it wasn't a lost generation. I'm very confident that the children of the COVID generation are far from lost. While during a pandemic, it was inevitably hard for our young people, and particularly for our more vulnerable young people. It was also given many the opportunity to gain a range of really important skills, such as resilience, ingenuity, creativity, confidence, and responsibility. All of those core skills are central to being an effective adult. So as well as acquiring new and unexpected bits of deep knowledge where children have had a chance to take control of their own learning, we really have to build on this. If you think about our four capacities, which I'll come on to later, actually, these could be the strengths and the ongoing legacy for our COVID generation. As I've already said, let's build on these. And on that note, why don't we hear from a few children across Scotland reflecting on their experiences of the last 18 months?
I enjoyed being able to see my family and getting to spend more time with my sister because she goes to a different school, so sometimes I find it hard to see her.
I enjoyed having the freedom of working at my own pace as it allowed me to do my work better and more efficiently.
I enjoyed spending more time with my family, and I enjoyed how it was more like a relaxed schedule, like you didn't have to get everything done at like an exact certain time.
I found it hard to wrap my head around like the difficult parts of the course without any support from my teachers.
Well, I had some technical difficulties, like with videos, especially like physics. I found when we're doing graphs, for example, the video was going faster than the voice, so I was a bit confused and it's hard.
Well, it was the big mainstream classes that I find more harder. My computing was hard because my parents didn't really understand it, so I had to start.
I found it difficult to understand some things because my family ain't no tech whizzes or anything, so it's harder to find things or load on to something you don't know how to or do something.
At school?
Getting back to like using the resources, like in graphics, I could use like the applications like for like CAD software and all that.
I like that there was more learning, and I liked playing with my friends outside again.
I enjoyed getting back to the clubs and getting to do netball again.
So my one was that we were having like loads of fun, and we were also help each other remember our work, and we also had more jobs to do. I really liked the math. I really like the math.
Wasn't that good to hear? Voices of young people shaping our version of events with their actual reality. 3 easy questions there to ask your students to reflect on. Thanks to both of the schools involved in creating that video for us, Dice Primary and Duncanrig Secondary. Really appreciate it. In the next part of the session, I want to concentrate on moving forwards out of the pandemic and also talk about some of the work that we're going to be doing in Education Scotland between now and the end of the academic year. Let's start with the OECD review and Scotland's Curriculum for Excellence into the Future, which was published, as you know, in June 2021. What we need to remember is the report is broadly positive about the direction of Curriculum for Excellence, but quite rightly also makes some recommendations for the system to consider and to improve. As an improving and learning system, we welcome that. But I'm not going to talk about the recommendations here, but I do want to make the point that's really important, that this document is only one of a series of documents at the moment that provides some guidance on the future direction for Scottish education. Going round the screen here, the other documents include Audit Scotland's report on improving outcomes for young people through school education, the Equity Audit, Plan 21 to 24, colloquially known as the Promise, Support for Learning All Our Children and All Their Potential, again, the Morgan Review, the report by the International Council of Education Advisors, the Attainment Scotland Fund Evaluation, Year 5, and a second OECD report on the Upper Secondary Education Student Assessment. If you're not familiar with these documents, it's really important that you're aware of them and perhaps discuss them with colleagues. As well as these other landmark pieces of legislation, such as the UNCRC, which I know we are all committed to delivering in Scotland and very proud of taking this forward. And while the news recently has been a lot about the 12 OECD recommendations, when I read all the reports, what I actually see are 39 recommendations in total. 39. 39 recommendations for a whole system, some of which are systemic, some of which are very large scale, means that moving forward is going to be so important that we look at the totality of these recommendations and their interconnectivity, and not just trying to tick them off with surface level activity. And I urge you to think about that when you reflect in school. I am being slightly vague here because, as well as recommendations, there are also considerations. It's important that we don't get the two words confused. There's recommendations and considerations. One of the problems with both recommendations and considerations is that they often lead to change. Sometimes the change is positive, but sometimes it can have a negative long-term impact on the system, the unintended consequences. One of the biggest problems with change is that it can cause you to lose your focus, and as an unintended consequence is that you stop doing the things that were working well. We mustn't do that in Scotland. Put simply, it's really easy to reform the wrong things. Really easy to reform the wrong things. So my plea is that as we enter the next phase of reform, is that we really think deeply about the things that are working well across the system, and the things that are working well in some parts of Scotland, but need a little bit more work to have reach, to be consistent across the whole of Scotland and to have that impact. The documents that I mentioned and had on the slide earlier cite a lot of the things that are going really well. So it's important that we build from here and really understand the nuances of each document and not just look at the recommendations in isolation and work through those as isolated pieces of work. We know about the totality of Scottish education, the totality of CFE. It's one of the system's strengths, and that comes out clearly in all of these reports. So we really need to make sure we don't compartmentalise. Your work in school doesn't compartmentalise elements from a reduced set of recommendations, rather than looking across the sweep, learning from our academic colleagues, learning from the research based in the system, and taking it forward collectively. So at Education Scotland, we've been spending some time recently thinking about reform and how we can prepare for reform. We've also been looking at the nuances of the reports that I've already just mentioned there, and making sure that we do build on the things that are working well and recognise your effective, highly effective and outstanding practice. For example, the work on the Curriculum for Excellence refreshed narrative was only just getting started just before COVID hit. We ran a series of workshops that were very well received and valued by all the groups that attended. So we're going to be working hard in the coming months to increase our offer around professional learning linked to the curriculum. Remember though, when we talk about curriculum in Scotland, we're really lucky because we're referring to the totality of what is planned for all children and young people throughout their education. So of course, that includes curriculum areas and subjects, but it also importantly includes opportunities for personal achievement, ethos and the life of the school, and of course, interdisciplinary learning. All of those are fundamentals for Scottish curriculum. The key to all this is curriculum design or curriculum making, key themes you've heard others talk about in great depth. So we want to make sure that as practitioners in Scotland, we collectively get a better understanding of how curriculum design works to help you see the flexibilities within the system and not just the complexities within the system. Because within those freedoms and flexibilities is absolutely teacher autonomy, teacher agency, and the art of curriculum design and the curriculum offer our young people see. We're already in the early phases, and this will increase and the offer will grow throughout the session. You might already have noticed that the sub-themes of this year's SLF Online are also the themes that you can now see round the heart on the screen. So these are central. What are you doing in school about these? Have you had those conversations? Did you start those conversations just before COVID? Was that the plan? And then, of course, we were all blown off course. So I commend to you, let's go back and think about the refreshed narrative, think about how we can use this to shape our work going forward. Now let's move on to the 4 capacities. The 4 capacities were viewed so positively by the OECD and by those they spoke to during their evidence gathering session. I have the privilege sometimes of talking to audiences from around the world, and it is their one thing that they take away from Scottish education is these wonderful capacities that look at the outcomes that we want and the outputs that we want for our young people. But there are some challenges around what we actually mean by some of the capacities and how, for example, do we actually know when a young person leaves formal education at whatever point they leave our system, that they are confident or responsible citizens. So as part of the work on curriculum design, we'll be making sure that the 4 capacities are at the heart of what we do. The 4 capacities will also be a key part of the work that we're just about to start on language. Within the nuances and the narrative, the main report of the OECD, there's a lot of talk about the importance of language, the meta language, if you like, for teaching and learning. So for example, page 63 of the OECD report, I'll just highlight a balanced discussion with active input from stakeholders with different perspectives and interests would be highly useful. It's necessary first for the productivity of such a debate to reach more clarity on what the Scottish system means by terminology such as knowledge, skills, attitudes, attributes, capacities, capabilities, competencies, dispositions and the like. Well, that list is pretty extensive, isn't it? So let's make sure we are really clear and we have a shared understanding about it. Page 90 says stakeholder qualified parts of the CFE language as technical jargon that had lost educational meaning and lent itself to interpretation. And it's rather about going back to the meaning beyond the words and guaranteeing that all stakeholders give the same meaning to key words and phrases in CFE, such as benchmarks and IDL. So if we think about that, we really need to be moving that narrative forward. So to help us do this, Education Scotland are going to start a new piece of work that we're calling Language Matters. As part of this piece of work, we'll work with the system to try to develop a better collective understanding of the key terminology suggested by the OECD, as well as other terminology suggested by those working in the system. I must stress with you though, we plan to co-create this piece of work. We have to build it with you. So we'll do this using the 3 fields of knowledge model that many of you are familiar with as part of our already extensive PLL programs that many of you are part of. So in this model, we'll combine practitioner knowledge gathered from you from a series of webinars and discussions, public knowledge, the knowledge from theory, research, effective practice, academic study. And then we'll use this to create new knowledge created through collaborative working and combining both of those 2 spheres, practitioner and public knowledge. This is a new type of approach for us in Scotland, but I think it's the right one if we're serious about developing the next phase of the Scottish curriculum hand in hand with the profession, and in particular those closest to children and young people. So we're really quite excited about that because that will form the foundation of our further work, which will then take forward the 39 recommendations across all these change programmes and support change and development and improvement in our aspirations for Scottish education. Over time, we'll work with the system to develop a common understanding about what we mean by each of the capacities. We'll look at what they mean in practice and exemplify that across a variety of different learning contexts, and provide a range of tools to empower those within schools and settings to build on these examples and exemplars with their own local context. So we build up a national bank that actually exemplifies what the 4 capacities are, how our children and young people demonstrate them, and how we can be accurate about their achievement. A simple model of define, exemplify and empower will become a key feature of much of Education Scotland work as we move forward. Define, exemplify and improve. In the final section of my talk to you this morning, I want to share some of the thinking we've been doing across Education Scotland at the end of session 2021. The discussion paper, which I'll make available after this session, is based on evidence we gathered pre-COVID and during COVID. You know that our HMI were out looking at remote learning. We were engaging with schools on a weekly basis and producing reports, looking at the learning that had taken place. We spoke to young people, we spoke to parents, and importantly, we spoke to you in the profession. And we also looked across the world to see how systems are building back from this period. We grouped all of that evidence, all of that conversation, all of those discussions, all of that study into 10 themes to support our own discussions internally and planning. And I think it might be both useful and interesting to explore one of 2 of them here with you today. These themes aren't specifically linked to any of our reports or specific 39 recommendations, that I mentioned earlier, but when you read them and when you have a look at the discussion paper, you'll be able to see the really obvious overlaps. So the 10 key themes that we have collated this information, the evidence and learning from the system, not only in Scotland, but worldwide as well, are those you can see on the screen. Strengthening the curriculum, an obvious one. Refocus of pedagogy, that's really central. Reimagining assessment, ensuring inclusion and equity for all. Driving and enabling empowerment and collective autonomy. Of course, a key one, broadening access and the use of technology, which has come out very strongly. Prioritising health and wellbeing, building community. Critically, let's not forget joining up the learner journey for our young people. And of course, that underpinned by creating strong system leaders. So let me unpack the building community heading there, for example. We think we need to do more to join up learning communities to help create improved experiences and the continuity for learners and their families. This is particularly true when we take that lens of learning, teaching and assessment. Just before COVID, we were starting to see improved joined up provision in the senior phase across schools, colleges and employers, driven by DYW, STEM and some of the initiatives, including the learner journey. During lockdown, we saw clusters of primary schools bring together children remotely, particularly smaller schools, to learn in cross-school groups, often linked to interest and developmental stage. That was a real shift forward. Isn't it time then that we build on the effective practice that I've just illuminated there and started to think of clusters of early years settings and schools, then districts and communities within local areas as new campuses of learning with shared expertise and resources enabled by technology that we learn from our COVID experiences? There's an opportunity here. Let's grab it. Let me turn now to the first three themes on our list, the intrinsically linked and interconnected core of our shared profession and business: curriculum, assessment and pedagogy. They're the bits that excite me. They're the bits that drive what we do. They're the bits our young people learn from, develop from, and ultimately drive systemic change. I've talked about curriculum already, and due to time, I'll leave assessment for another day. But what about pedagogy? We've been really challenged collectively to place a focus on pedagogy because of the initially unplanned move to online and digital learning through a remote field, etc., and the dreaded COVID. But the learning we've gained from this experience presents us as a system and globally with a golden opportunity. We've recently made a really important step in early years and in the National Practice Guidance with its clear focus on pedagogy. And that's clearly meeting a felt and identified need across the system and has worked highly effectively to take that debate and move it forward. It's really, building the ambition has really shifted the pedagogy in early years forward. But what does good and effective pedagogy look like as we move from 3 to 18 and then beyond? What does effective pedagogy look like developmentally for a 4-year-old, a 10-year-old, or a 16-year-old? Are we confident in that? Are we consistent? Have we had that narrative? Is it something we've reflected on? What inspiration can Scotland gain from research publications such as the Open University's Innovative Pedagogy Reports? They've been released every year since 2012. Are they relevant? How many of us have even heard of them, let alone looked at them and used them in our reflective practice or our inquiry models? Are some pedagogies more appropriate to help young people acquire knowledge than others? How do we know? How does this change across the 8 curriculum areas, across subject boundaries? What could we do collectively as a system to learn about this? It's really important we now reflect on this. What is the link between pedagogy and skills acquisition? We need to think about that. We need to learn about it, and then we need to share our learning. I present some of the questions here today to aid further discussion, to stimulate the system, to reflect with you and learn with you as we go through a national period of reform and change. The paper these questions come from has been used internally in Education Scotland, some of our different teams, and at some stakeholder events. And it's also been used to shape our corporate plan at Education Scotland, which then drives the work we use to support you, the system, and our learners. These are also important questions and considerations as we come out of the pandemic and focus on reform and emerge with an improved system. Remember earlier I said we mustn't go backwards. We mustn't go back to what's comfortable. We mustn't focus too much on, the practical face masks, hand washing, mitigation. Of course, those are important. Children and young people's health and safety and your own is absolutely fundamental, but we mustn't stagnate as a system. So if you'd like a copy of the paper to support discussions in your own schools and settings, you can get a copy from the Education Scotland virtual stand at SLF online, and we'll also make it available from our website next week for you. Finally, just to let me sum up then, COVID has changed everything, absolutely everything. You're more acutely aware of that than anyone. But we need to progress, not regress. The lost generation is actually the golden generation. We have an awful lot to learn from them. I have the privilege, as you do, of engaging with young people all the time and hearing from them about what they've learned. Yes, we hear about some of the things they've missed, but my goodness, their resilience and strength will hold them strong throughout their future life, is my belief. It's not a lost generation, it's a golden generation. We're not short of recommendations, as I said, or considerations for a change, but we need to look for the common themes and think deeply about the order and sequence of implementation. Let's not rush at this, let's get it right. Education reform is around the corner, as I said, but we must be careful not to reform the wrong things and to put always at the forefront of our mind our children and young people and the unintended consequences. We need to use the time before reform to strengthen our understanding so that we've got the foundations right for reform. We need to look at the language we use in the Scottish system, get a consistent meta language and understanding. We need to focus on curriculum design, and we need to really clarify and define the 4 capacities. There are a number of key considerations that we could all consider now. We need a national focus on pedagogy from 3 to 18 plus. Very strongly, in every setting, in every school, let's focus and talk about pedagogy. We need also in that discussion to think more about self-directed learning. We know that was a strength during our period of remote learning. Our young people learned an awful lot from it, and we could build on that as a system to take our system from good to great. Skills development needs clear definitions and progression frameworks linked to the knowledge acquisition and learning experiences. If we could interconnect that with one real clear Scottish way, there'd be real connectivity between all the different systems, between all the different qualifications, between all the different stages and phases of education. So skill development, clearly defined, linked to progression frameworks, interrelated to knowledge acquisition, and then we shape the learning experiences that support that framework. So those are some of the challenges. And this morning, I just want to say welcome to the Scottish Learning Festival. Thank you for all you're doing. Thank you for coming this morning and listening. I know it's before a very busy day for all of you. I hope you found it interesting and thought-provoking. Remember that you can pick up the discussion paper at the Education Scotland virtual stand, and that there's lots of other resources available in that forum. Before I go, I just want to remind you again of the sessions that are running across the next 3 days. You can check out the full programme on the SLF website. And I really hope you enjoy our first virtual learning festival for 2021. I know I will. And I just want to thank you very much for all that you're doing in these really, really challenging times. We know how difficult it is. We know how uncertain it is. But the one thing I'm certain of is your strength, your professionalism and your care for everyone that you support in the system. Thank you. I think there might be some time for some questions. Okay, I think that we don't have any questions in the chat, which I hope is a positive, but there's certainly opportunities throughout the sessions and also at times at the Education Scotland SLF virtual stand for you to raise those questions, for you to engage with lots of people in the team, and also in the workshops to do that. So again, I just reiterate my thanks. I'll remind you about the session tonight, live at 7 o'clock with the Cabinet Secretary, Shirley-Anne Somerville, followed by a Q&A with Miss Somerville and myself tonight, which again will be recorded for broadcast if that doesn't suit you. So great thanks. Thank you for engaging. Remember, you can pick up the discussion paper at the Education Scotland SLF virtual area, and have a good day. Thanks again.